We're going to hear from the Port of Los Angeles, a public agency that the mayor of Los Angeles gets to oversee, and so there's politics involved. But let me tell you a little bit about the Port of Los Angeles to give you kind of background. Last year it celebrated its 100th birthday. It's been used for everything from international trade. It's obviously the main, I keep saying that word obviously, main port to Asia, and it's been used by military and as a military base through many wars. Its annual revenue at the port is $370 million. So think about all of the boats, the cargo, the trains, the trucks that come through the Port of Los Angeles. It is the #1 port in all of the United States. So that is right here in our own backyard. Not counting any of the dock workers, but their company has 720 executives. And as I said, it is run, no, I did not say, but it answers to an LA Board of Harbor Commissions, which was started, by the way, in 1908. Now let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Ralph Appy. He has 20 years. He's been working at the Port of Los Angeles for 20 years. By the way, I saw your new website, fantastic, just yesterday. He is the Director of Environmental Management, but again, I refer to him as the top Chief Green Officer at the Port of Los Angeles. He needs to balance growth and ecological sustainability. His team of 35 people have a $75 million operating budget. They conduct enormous and significant environmental studies on air quality, traffic, and noise. He has a PhD in zoology, a master's in marine biology, and I did find out that his mother had once upon a time gone to USC. He told me that. He is a lifelong scientist enthusiast, and so please welcome to the podium Dr. Ralph Appy.
I'll go up here as well. I think I'm probably, of the panelists, the tree hugger of the group, if you would. Did a lot of my work actually in New Brunswick, in Canada, and worked on a topic that's really the antithesis of sustainability and has to do with fisheries research. I was doing stock assessments for Atlantic cod. And by the way, the details, the choices you make, did you pick chicken or fish today, and which one of those is most sustainable? Depends on the fish. Which fish is it, you know? So there's all these decisions that come, the devil's in the details on all sustainability things. And so my job right now is very, very a wonderful job. I get to deal in all kinds of things. I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about today, a lot of what you're hearing today is about climate change. That's not our key issue, to be honest with you. It's a significant issue that we're dealing with, but as I'll show you later, it's not our only one. If I have the next slide, please. What I'm going to do is give you a little background on the Port of Los Angeles. A lot of people don't even know it exists. It does, and it's important to all of you because 40% of all imported goods come through the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach together. That's for the entire nation. Half of our cargo comes here, goes off to Kansas City, Chicago, points to the east. And so this is an aerial view of it, and you can see some things I want to point out really importantly. To the right is the Port of Long Beach. We're sister ports. Port of LA is #1, followed shortly by Port of Long Beach. We brag back and forth about who's #1. And when we talk about #1, we're talking about container volumes. Those big boxes you see going down the freeway, get on the 710, get stuck behind them or in between them, that's coming from us. And so we're the #1 and 2 ports in the US. We're about #5 in the world. So we're very, very fortunate. We didn't necessarily have a great plan that we were going to be the biggest ports in the world, but it just happened to be that location helped, and then we also developed some really great cargo terminals here at the port. And one thing I want to point out here is you notice there's 2 sites. It says Wilmington and San Pedro. Those are communities right next to the port, and historically the port was the #1 in the world cannery, fishing canneries, and so that went out of business, and so it's now been replaced by all kinds of different ventures. We handle marine liquid bulk, all kinds of things. But the community is right next to us. You can spit across the street and you'll hit communities, low-income communities, especially in Wilmington. And so these things frame how the port does operations. Next slide. So this is our bragging rights. Don't have to commit all of it to memory. If you want a PDF, I'm sure there'll be one available. But one thing I want to say that makes us a little different from some of the other speakers is that we run on a Tidelands Trust grant. The lands of the port were given to the City of Los Angeles in trust for us to operate as an industrial maritime commercial facility. And so all the monies we get, we're a landlord. We're like Richard Ellis. We're a landlord. We rent out our terminals to a lot of mostly international firms, and they pay us dearly for that use of that land. And then we take that money and we're supposed to put it back into what's called the Harbor Revenue Fund, which is specifically only for the redevelopment of the port as an industrial facility. That money it's not supposed to be siphoned off for other sorts of things. And you can see some of the stats here. 1907 is when we were first initiated. But some of the really important things I want to draw your attention to that relate to our place in the United States. If you look down at the bottom there, it talks about some jobs. 1.1 million jobs in California, 3.3 in the US. If you go up, the tax revenues are really important. When we recently went back to Congress to try to get money, we actually have a map for them that shows all the different congressional districts across the US, how important the Port of Los Angeles actually is to their districts. And so down at the very bottom, you'll see trading partners. China is our #1 trading partner by a narrow margin now, but that's going off the scale here shortly. In fact, this bottom graph at the bottom here shows, and those numbers mean TEUs, and for educational purposes, TEU stands for 20 equivalent unit. So if you see the box going down the freeway, the little box is 20 feet long, the big box is 40 feet long, and so by history and convention, we measure our cargo in 20-foot equivalent units. So one of the big boxes is 2 TEUs. So that's a lot of boxes coming to the port, and it's going to double or triple by the year 2020. Right now we're flat, and everybody says, oh, it won't happen, but we've redone the analysis, the cargo projections, and there's lots of cargo going to be coming through not only the Port of LA, but this is all the West Coast, coming to the Panama Canal, the East Coast as well. Next slide. So what does this mean in terms of for every action, there's a reaction. These are some of the big issues that being the center of this goods movement chain. We virtually have every type of mobile equipment coming in there. We got ships, trucks, trains, yard equipment, all of it diesel. And so big problems. In the late 90s, diesel emissions were identified as air toxic. So our #1 issue, important issue at the port, is the effects of air pollution on human health. Right now, there's terrible problems associated with major corridors in LA and all major cities dealing with diesel emissions next to those corridors, right where we put our schools, right where the playgrounds are, and around port areas. That's our #1 issue we have. The little diagram up there was one put out with the Air Quality Management District, shows increased cancer risk. If you live in this area of up to 12,000 and a million, increased cancer risk, long-term residential cancer risk from living in this area. To kind of peg that, though, just to let you know, living in LA, your increased cancer risk long-term is about 300,000 in a million. So this is that's from all sources, from everything you eat, you breathe, your lifestyle, those sorts of things. So, but that's a big issue to us. We also are interested in climate change, and you can see the whole litany of things associated with the goods movement chain. Truck, water quality, habitat management. When we build those big landfills, we got to replace that habitat. We also have major social issues. Recently, you've probably been reading in the LA Times about the port's clean truck program. Inside the gate, the longshoremen make $80,000 plus a year. Outside the gate, the guys driving the trucks make maybe $30,000 if they're lucky. Got to pay for their own trucks, which are breaking down. They use the oldest, dirtiest trucks. The big long-haul trucks that go nationwide, when they start breaking down, they use them here in LA for the short haul to take the boxes from down to the rail yard. So major social issues, economic disparity right around the edge of the port and other areas. It's just a whole potpourri of things that affect us. You can see the bottom right slide there. There is actually a picture of a community with the trucks parked in the neighborhood, empty container storage on the back, and that, interestingly enough, those extra containers are dealing with our import-export balance. We end up with more containers, empty containers left here. What do you do with them? You put them in somebody's backyard. Next slide. So for a long time, there has been, if you would, a sustainability ethic, and that's what we should probably be talking about. You can dress it up all you want, but if you're not married to it, you're not doing it, it's not important. The sustainability program provides a framework that you can build around. So we're actually been doing sustainability for a while, but we're building a framework, if you would. And this comes from our mayor. The mayor of Los Angeles came in and said, we're going to be sustainable. We're going to be a green city, and so we're part of that city. We're a department of the City of Los Angeles. And what we recognized, and by the way, these in the strategic plan, my division, these are the box on the right and the upper box are my responsibilities. And so the mayor and who puts our board of commissioners into place has said that we're not going to grow unless we can grow green. And so that's our big push these days. And we believe without making our terminals green, without reducing our carbon footprint, without reducing the health effects of those terminals, we will not be able to grow. And so it's just will be unsustainable to continue in the way we're going. Next slide. So this is kind of an overview of our sustainability program. And this was actually put together by somebody here in the audience that I'd like to introduce in a second. And this shows you the 3 different pillars of sustainability. And actually we have, and fortunate in my office, I have a young person named Jan, you want to stand up? Jan Green-Rebstock. She's actually a doctoral program here at USC. And so she's kind of dovetailing her work at the port and with what's going on here. And so we're in the throes of really trying to capitalize on it. We got lots of programs. All of our buildings are going to be LEED certified, not only ours, but we do all the infrastructure construction at the port. So all the terminals, when we rebuild, they're all going to be have a green quality to them. And so I'm going to just talk about several of these, but just to let you know it's a really broad programs that we have, but I'm just going to be mentioning a few of them, but you can see the general, and these apply not only internally, but also because we lease out our terminals, we're going to be requiring through lease requirements certain things to happen at the terminals as well. So that is a very powerful tool for us, is because we have these long-term 30-year leases with major firms, international firms. Next slide. Just to talk about some of our programs, hit a highlight of a few of them. Our Clean Air Action Plan, a very unusual program. We actually went together with the Port of Long Beach because all the cargo comes in there. What we didn't want to do is create a problem where one port is competing against the one next door, and so we have customers picking which port they're going to go to where they won't have to maybe do certain environmental things, for instance, use low sulfur fuel in their ships. So we actually banded together the Port of Long Beach. It's a joint plan. It's a 5-year action plan. It's going to really change the way things are happening at the port. And you notice up there too, the main pressure on this is not, you don't see greenhouse gases listed up there. You see diesel particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides. These are the major emissions coming out of these mobile sources. The Port of LA and Long Beach account for 50% of all the sulfur emissions in the entire Los Angeles basin. And it has to do with the fact that these big ships use what's called heavy fuel oil. It's a residual left over after refining. It's what's left in the bottom of the bucket, if you would, and it's very inexpensive, and they can, getting more expensive, but they can get it at a low price. And to put that in perspective, Maersk, one of the companies, has a new ship out, and that ship burns 13 tons per day of that fuel. Okay, to kind of give you an idea of the quantum amount of emissions coming out of port-related goods movement programs. But these are some kind of elements of it. We're upgrading all those old trucks coming to and from the port. Each truck's owned by an owner-operator, independent. We're changing that. We're going to make it a concession. And the Port of LA is also going to require them to be employees. So we're trying to get those old trucks into a company where they'll be maintained. Very controversial. It's really actually split the two ports apart a little bit. And so that's a very controversial element of that program, but we're putting lots of money into the Clean Truck program. There's a big, strong LNG component of that program, where a lot of those trucks are going to start using LNG instead of diesel. Equipment, there's 700-800 pieces of equipment at the ports that pull those containers around. Locomotives, and you see down the far end, the ships are about 50% of the emissions from the port are from ships. And we have a program where we're plugging in those ships to electric power and requiring different types of fuels and other technologies. I also want to point out, I'm going to talk more about it, is that bottom bullet down there, up there is the Technology Advancement Program. We're trying to infuse into an industry that hasn't changed historically. That diesel engine's a wonderful engine. It'll run on virtually anything. You can fix it with baling wire, whatever. And so there's not a lot of tools in the toolbox for reducing those emissions. So we're trying to, through an infusion of some technology money, if you would, trying to change that. Next slide. So here's we have a technology advancement program. We actually receive applications from entrepreneurs and other people that want to try new technologies, and we come in, we have a team that evaluates them. And to give you an idea, some of the ones on the demonstration side of it, we're doing things like hybrid tugs that push the ships around. We had Foss, one of the tug companies, come in, and we put some money with them, and they're actually going to make a hybrid tug. And so the tug sits around idling a lot. It can not have to do that. It can run on electricity a lot of the time. We're working with some of our customers to do things on the big ship engines. And those ship engines are just amazing. A ship engine in one of those ships is probably as long as this building is wide. To give you an idea, 3 or 4 of us could stand in one of the cylinders in it. They're huge things. Those things last forever, so we're looking at new technologies, new ways to reduce emissions from those ship engines. So you can see fuels, hybrids are important, electric. We actually, down here in the lower corner, we are now about to roll out the first electric truck to serve any port. And we're going to be using it in our terminals and to hopefully, in the long term, move containers from the port to the rail yards. And don't forget those rail yards then, about half the cargo goes to rail yards. Either at the port, we have rail yards in the port, or it goes downtown. And so we're trying to make that as clean as possible. As trucks going from the port into the community or to downtown also have emissions. So any way we can reduce emissions from the trucks at the port, we do it in the community as well. We're even looking beyond the immediate number of types of equipment that we have. We're actually looking at some kind of things out into the future, but hopefully not too far. We're looking at different types of things. Maglev, for instance, is being proposed. Hopefully here in the next 5 years or so, somebody wants to do a maglev program. Linear induction is something else that might be very practical because it might be able to convert our existing rail lines to more of a linear induction kind of program without having a whole new set of infrastructure requirements. And then there's a whole bunch of kind of surreal ones, and people come out of the woodwork when you start looking at these new technologies. And so I think there's a lot of hope here, but the big problem our port has right now is we can handle a lot of capacity, but the space between the port and getting to Chicago and getting out of the basin is a big problem. And so we really believe that we have to look at a futuristic, if you would, kind of big transport system. And it's very difficult for a port, which only has a small boundary, if you would, to try to influence everything else. And so we have our hands full, but we're getting a lot of interest in these different technologies. Next slide. Something we are doing is, in regards to greenhouse gases, is we're embarking right now on a 10 megawatt solar project at the port. It doesn't resolve our issues, but it's a start, and we're going to have 1 megawatt of that installed by the end of this year. Virtually every foot of building is going to have photovoltaic panels on it, on our buildings, our customers' buildings. And so we're looking really forward to this. But to put it in perspective, this 10 megawatts, we're looking at building a new cruise ship terminal. And these cruise ships come in, and maybe many of you have left on them to go to the Mexican Riviera out of LA. But one of those container ships comes in, and when we plug it into shoreside power, it may pull 10 megawatts of power. Okay? So these are small cities, and so we've got a long way to go, but every little bit helps. Next slide. Because we're in the goods movement business, is that our problems don't really just exist here at the port. All those ships you see are internationally flagged. There are virtually no U.S. flagged container ships left. There's perhaps one company called Matson, which calls at the Port of Long Beach and flies largely to Hawaii and up and down the coast. And so we have no real control over those internationally flagged vessels. They're controlled by an international organization. And so we have now a very large outreach program. We're actually going out and meeting with different ports around the world. We've met with also the fuel providers, MAN B&W, the big engine producers, to see what they're doing. And we've also even implemented a collaborative, Pacific Rim collaborative, and we've dovetailed with the Port of Shanghai. And they're very interested in these issues, and so we're also trying to learn from one another. We do staff exchanges. We had our first meeting in LA in 06, In November, we're having another one. And kind of the emphasis there is to try to find things that we can agree on, that we can put and influence the International Maritime Organization to try to influence these changes. And there's huge international things going on now regarding to greenhouse gases and also regarding to the types of fuels these ships use. And everything is complicated. You'd think, well, let's use the very low sulfur fuels. Well, to get those low sulfur fuels, they have to go through extra refining. And so then you look at, well, what's the trade-off between the burning those fuels or actually at the power plant where the extra refining goes? You actually end up with less greenhouse gas emissions from one or the other. And so everything has, you know, a complication associated with it. Next slide. What's interesting is that there is a real business incentive here. It's interesting that we were the first port in the world to actually plug in a container ship into electricity. And people always ask the question, well, aren't you just moving those emissions someplace else? The answer is yes and no. Certainly there are power plant emissions, but they are so dwarfed relative to those ship emissions. You just can't believe it. One of these ships docked at the port a day will emit a ton of NOx emissions, nitrogen oxides. And so when you shift that emission burden to a power plant, it's minuscule compared to what's happening at the port. And so we now have 2 terminals the ships come in, they turn off, their main engines don't run, they turn off their auxiliaries, they plug in electricity. And we actually got the Clean Air Excellence Award from EPA for that. What was interesting is shortly after that happened, happened at the China Shipping Terminal in Los Angeles. And you can see they came out with their big brochure. And so there's obviously a driving force out there. It's the power, if you would, of the consumer. It's the power of the Walmarts and the Nikes to say, we want you to reduce your carbon footprint. We want you to deliver to us something green. And so it looks like our customers, our shipping line customers, are actually in a market where they have to compete to be green in order to get the business of those big box companies, if you would. And so we're seeing a lot of that now. One of our customers voluntarily changed all their fuel to low sulfur emissions, and they use that then at the table to say we're shipping green. The whole goods movement system is a area ripe for sustainability practices, ways of doing things electronically rather than by. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes trucks take a container out to the inland somewhere. They drop it off, they come back empty, pick up a truck, another container at the port. Well, wouldn't it be great if they went out to the inland empire, okay, dropped off a container, picked up another one, and brought it back to the port? Okay, now remember, these are independent owner-operators, so how do you do that electronically? How do you make it so that they can minimize, cut in half, if you would, the amount of trips probably? And so those are some of the challenges, and there's people out there working on those things. Next slide. So, final thoughts, if you would. I think sustainability, it's nice to talk about. It's even more important to do, and I believe that it really starts with everybody. It has to. I'm really impressed, by the way, with the speakers here today. The honesty, I think, is really important, and that we've been doing sustainability for a long time. We have a little bird called the least tern. It's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, if you would. We found this endangered species at the port. We've been looking out after it ever since. We have 15 acres plucked right in the middle of one of the biggest industrial complexes. They're doing great. We've taken care of them. We're monitoring them. And so you really can make a difference, but it starts with real finite actions and not just necessarily talking about sustainability. And this is a business school, and I'm not a business person. However, I have to tell you that the comparison that was shown by Chuck at the beginning of this, I don't see those incompatible at all. The key to any sustainable program, to environmental protection, has to do with economic prosperity. We can sit here and talk all we want about it, but if we're not prosperous, a lot of the things that we're doing, if business does not work, we cannot be doing these things, and we cannot be talking about them. And so I don't see any conflict at all between the environment, sustainability, and economic prosperity. In fact, they're totally relying on one another. So with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I have a question, and I'll let Ralph come back up to the stage. So Ralph, all of these cargo boats come from every international country around the world. How do you tell someone how to run their business that you really can't tell? You know, they're from China and Japan. I mean, how do you force them to do what you want them to do, because you were so honest admitting all of the pain and the pollution that the port does? I mean, I commend you for, stating all of that. But, it is your tenants. But again, even to Sally's, I'm not saying it's any easier or harder that they were here on the States, but you're getting all of these different, hundreds and thousands of different countries and languages. How do you and all the other ports fix this problem? And I also wanted to, and I'll say, what goes on here in Los Angeles and California is then transformed throughout the world. So again, this whole green thing in California, I mean, it's starting right here, and the ripple effect around the world. So anyway.
Yeah, we are called the left coast, by the way, by the other ports in the U.S. And to be honest with you, they tend to downplay. I've got a friend that Joe Monaco, who works for the Port of New York, New Jersey, which is like the third, fourth port down the list on who's the biggest and best. And every time something happens out here, he calls me up and says, "Ralph, you're killing me." The issues, some cases are different. Sometimes they just haven't realized them yet. But the majority of our ships come from Asia. They may be Maersk ships, but they're plying between Asia and LA. And the reason is it's a short distance. Some of them will be going through Panama. A big issue, there is a environmental group called NRDC out that watches everything we do, that comes to every one of our board meetings and has a lot of very well-paid and efficient and good lawyers. And so the big issue we have is how, in fact, do you control international shipping at the ports? And they believe, and I think we do as well, is that we do that through what we're called a local proprietor rule. And that we can do that because they have to come and sign a lease with us, for starters. So that's a 30-year, say, voluntary lease. And so the good news about it is that they can come in and we can tell them what our environmental requirements are, and they can amortize those costs over a 30-year lease. And so they can actually have a business plan in place. That's a good thing.